Tony. Welcome to Sew Lounge. Today I'm going to teach you how to sew a raglan sleeve. Now you may be thinking, a what kind of sleeve? A raglan sleeve. And while you may not be familiar with the name, you are probably familiar with the sleeve type. It is very popular with sports jerseys, particularly baseball. I think of it as like a baseball sleeve. It's the kind of sleeve that starts under your arm and then goes at an angle up to the neckline. So these sleeves are usually in baseball jerseys because they're really good for shoulder movement, and it gives you a lot more freedom to move. And as an added bonus, they're a lot easier to put in than a set-in sleeve. So today we're going to be talking about raglan sleeves. I am using McCall's 7862. I specifically picked this pattern because it does have a raglan sleeve, and that's a really great sleeve for a beginner to start with because it's pretty straightforward and easy to get done correctly, and it looks good. So that's what we're doing today. I have my pattern pieces all cut out. If you watched the last video, I put in the pockets, still working with the same dress. I have my sleeve pattern all cut out and marked, and I'm ready to go. So let's take a look at the instructions and go in for a closer look. Here we have a close-up of the pattern instructions. The sleeve starts with number 8. And for view A, and then for view B, it's at 11. Now, even though I am making view B for the majority of the dress, I am not going to do the sleeve instructions for B because that is adding a whole lot of extra work to add in these grommets, which I'm not gonna do because I don't like the way that looks. So, for the most part, we are going to be following the instructions for view A, but the only difference is going to be we're going to have a little bit of a wider hem on the sleeve because the sleeve is longer in B than it is for A. So we'll get to that when we come to it. First steps are we're going to match the markings on the sleeve, sew it together, then we're going to finish the hem on the sleeve, and then we're going to put the sleeve into the garment armhole. So those are the 3 steps we're basically going to be covering today. And there you can see them all a little bit better. Let me zoom in a little bit. Okay, there we go. So starting with the sleeve, then we're going to put in the hem of the sleeve, and then we're going to sew in the sleeve. And that is what we're going to start with. So I'm going to take this pattern piece off of my sleeve, and then we are going to pin the wrong sides together, and we're going to find those dots. So there is the first one. We're going to put a pin in that. Well, let's get everything lined up both sides. So there we go. Put that pin in. I'm going to move down to the second dot. There is a dot here in the middle. It's a little bit harder to see, but pin that. Then the last pin is going to be down here. This dot is the bottom of the point of this shoulder seam, which is kind of like a dart. So when we're going to sew it, we're going to sew kind of in a diagonal and then go off the edge down here and then tie a knot to secure it. So once you've got this top part finished, we're going to move down to the bottom of the sleeve and match these 2 notches together to connect this bottom seam. And once you've got that done, pin up the other sleeve, and then we'll head on over to the sewing machine. So I'm at the sewing machine. I have my machine set to a straight stitch, and I have the stitch length at 2.5 as usual. And we are going to be lining up the fabric, and I pinned this the wrong way. We are going to, no I didn't, I did it right. Okay, so we're going to be lining up this top edge at the 5/8 inch mark to get started. Now, because this is kind of the same way we would sew a dart, we are not going to stay at 5/8 inch the whole time. We are going to go to that second dot, and then we're going to make a diagonal line straight to the bottom dart and then come off the fabric and then tie a knot to secure it because that's going to be in a fold. So I'm going to take this top pin out and put it to the side, and we are going to line up this edge with the 5/8 inch mark on machine. I'm going to lower that presser foot and roll the needle into my fabric to get started. So I'm just going to take a couple of stitches, and then I'm going to back stitch, and then I'm going to move forward again. So I'm sewing from the first dot to the second dot, and I'm going to take that pin out. And then at the second dot, I'm going to kind of turn my fabric because I want to go in more of a diagonal down to this dot. So kind of eyeball it, get it all lined up. Looks about right. And then we're just going to sew straight across that bottom dot and come off the fabric. You can lift up the needle, lift up that presser foot, and then pull a longer thread tail, which isn't cutting. There we go. And now I'm going to tie a knot down here at the end. So I'm at the ironing board, and the next step after you sew the shoulder seam is to trim it down. And I usually like to trim it pretty close, about a 1/4 of an inch away from the seam line. So we're going to just trim that off real quick. And then we are going to press the seam open. And I'm going to use a pressing ham to help me get that curve in. If you don't have a pressing ham, you can roll up a towel kind of into a log and then just adjust your sleeve dart over it so that you can press everything in. And my iron is set on cotton, and I do have it on high steam, so there's a lot of steam. Be careful you don't burn yourself. It hurts. All right, so you may be wondering, what about the bottom sleeve seam that we pinned earlier that we haven't done anything with? Okay, so I unpinned it, and I am making the executive decision that we are not going to follow the directions at this point because it makes it so much harder to finish this bottom edge of the sleeve if that seam is sewn. So with the dart in the top shoulder of the seam, we are going to keep the bottom open. We are going to lay it out, and we are going to grab our Dritz Easy Hem. If you don't have a Dritz Easy Hem, you can do the same thing with a hem gauge. Either way, it is so much easier to do it flat than curved. So we're doing this flat, not in the round, and you'll thank me later for it. So I'm going to fold the bottom edge of my sleeve, and I'm doing this the wrong way. So we're folding it towards the inside, the wrong side of the fabric, which would be the inside of the sleeve. And I am going to put my Dritz Easy Hem here, and I am going to fold this up to 1 inch. And my iron has turned off, so let's give that a sec. If you do not have a Dritz Easy Hem, you can do the exact same thing with a hem gauge. Just make sure you put it on 1 inch. You can fold your fabric up so that it is 1 inch all the way around. Or you can do a little piece at a time. I usually start in the middle and then work out to the sides because that makes it a little bit easier. So using this, we are going to press a 1 inch hem into the sleeve, since that's how we're finishing the sleeve. Let that cool. Just like I said, with a hem gauge, you do the same thing. We're just going to measure 1 inch, and then I'm just going to press to keep that in place. And we will go to the other end and repeat the process until the whole thing is done at 1 inch, which is the amount you need to turn under the hem on B. If you were doing A, it is 5/8 of an inch, so it's a little bit easier. Let me make sure that's even all the way around. Yes. So now, like we've done in the past, we are going to unfold that, and then we are going to fold it under again, that top edge, to a 1/4 of an inch, still using the Dritz Easy Hem or your hem gauge. So I'm just going to unfold that and fold up this bottom edge, and this is just finishing that raw edge, which would be along the top of the previously folded edge. So by doing this, we're making sure that the hem allowance of 1 inch is still staying at 1 inch because that's what we pressed first, and then we're unfolding and just finishing that edge 1/4 inch. And this is following along with the instructions as far as the measurements go and the amount that we're turning each piece, but it is not exactly the same for the way they want you to do it. So just press everything into place. Also, by pressing, this is going to eliminate the need to have to baste everything in. If you are following along, the instructions indicate to baste in the 1/4 inch, then baste in the 1 inch, and then go back in and do a permanent stitch line. If you do a really good job pressing and use steam, then you shouldn't need to baste because it'll be held in place just by the heat of the iron, and you can just go in and just do that single top stitch around the sleeve, which we'll do in a second. So just finish out the edge, that 1/4 inch, which we're almost done. So I'm back at the sewing machine, and the next step on the sleeve is going to be to sew this folded edge at the bottom of the sleeve in place. And we are going to be doing that very, very close to this edge that we just pressed under. So it's the top edge away from the hem edge. And we are going to get that all lined up. Let's go in for a closer look. All right, so we're getting everything lined up. I'm going to line up this edge with the edge of my presser foot. And then I want to sew very, very close to this top edge, so I'm going to move my needle over so that it's going to be sewing basically at 1/8 inch. So I'm going to roll my needle down to get started. And now I'm just going to start stitching. Keeping that edge all lined up. So you can see how if you press everything really well, you don't need to do any basting stitches through here. You can just come in and do a final stitch, which I would much rather do. So we're just coming to the end, and I'm just going to finish it out. Okay. So that is our nice edge that we've got the outside of the seam sleeve, and you can see it's all nice and neat, all sewn. So after you've finished finishing off the bottom edge, then pin the sides together at the notches, and we are going to get that lined up at the 5/8 inch mark. So lower your presser foot, and remember you had moved your needle over for this tight, close sewing on the edge down here, that was 1/8 inch. So we need to move our needle back to the middle position before we start sewing this, or we are going to have a bigger seam than 5/8, which will cause problems later once we start putting in the sleeve. So go ahead and put your needle in, make sure your needle is in the middle position, and start stitching. I'm going to back stitch and go forward again. Take out this pin when I get to it, and then keep stitching. And I'm going to back stitch here. One more. There we go. And finish out this seam. So now I'm going to head over to the ironing board one last time to press this open. And then I'll meet you back at the cutting table. All right, so we're back at the cutting table, and this is the last step to attach the sleeve, the raglan sleeve, to the garment. So following your instructions, we're on number 10, and if you look at the drawing, we are putting in the left sleeve first. So the way you know that is because the dart is on this front piece of the bodice, and then there's no dart on the back, obviously. So you may be wondering, how do I know, looking at the sleeve, how do I know which side's the front and which side's the back? It's really easy. The front part of the sleeve has 1 notch in it. The back part of the sleeve has 2. This is standard marking for all commercial patterns, and the corresponding seam that you have to attach it to will also have the same number of markings. So the front always has 1 notch and the back will always have 2 notches. That's how you know where you need to attach everything. So with the sleeve, we are taking the right sides together. So you want to flip your sleeve so the right side is out. And we are going to be attaching that. Did I grab the wrong sleeve? Yes, I grabbed the wrong sleeve because once you flip it, then it's the wrong one. So you can always check with the notches. So we're going to flip our sleeves so that the right side is touching the right side. So we want to pin it in on this side of the fabric. So we're going to match up the back notch, right sides of the fabric together, and you're kind of putting the sleeve down into the garment. So we're going to match those notches, and I'm going to grab some pins. We're going to put in a pin, and then we're going to match the other notch on the front of the sleeve. And put in a pin. And if you've got everything lined up just right, this bottom side seam should also all match up and be smooth so that everything's all matched up together. So I'm going to put a pin on either side of this to hold the seam open that's in the side of my dress. Now I'm going to move up the front edge and pin that whole section together so everything lines up. And then I'm going to do the exact same thing on the back, because we just want to make sure this all holds together and nothing is going to move while we are sewing. And this may seem kind of weird, but when you think about it, we're sewing in the seam that'll be on the inside of the garment, and then you're going to flip this sleeve out, and then everything will look good from the front. So finish those last pins, and then we're going to head back to the sewing machine. So we're back at the sewing machine, and the first thing that you need to do is make sure that your free arm of your sewing machine is accessible. So for me, that means I have to lift it up out of my table. And if you have any kind of a tray or a platform around the free arm of your machine, you want to remove that so that you can put the sleeve in and go sew in the round. And to do that, we're going to need to get it around the sewing machine. So once you have that done, then first step is going to be basting the first set of stitches in to just get everything to hold in place. And so we want to put our machine to the longest stitch length that we have. For my Bernina, it's a 5. And I am going to get everything lined up with the shoulder seam on the front. Let me make sure I have this going the right way. Yes. Okay, so lie out your garment off to the side of the table, and then you're going to want to flip that sleeve in. There we go. Okay. Get everything evened out, because if your sleeve is kind of folded, it's going to be a lot harder to do this. So I've got everything all lined up. Oh, I didn't pin it great there. That's what the problem is. So make sure everything is pinned and secure. And then you're going to be taking your garment and putting it around this arm, okay? Because that's going to help you to just get started. And then we're going to start on the top front part of the seam, and we're going to be basting. And remember that you want to do basting inside of the seam line. So since we're going to be sewing this at 5/8 of an inch, I'm going to move over and sew this at a 1/2 inch, and then we're going to be going back in with a second stitch line at a 1/4 of an inch. So this will put the basting stitches between our 2 permanent stitch lines, and usually you don't pull it out in a sleeve. It just adds additional security, additional so it won't ravel. It'll just provide some additional stitching to provide security so then it doesn't come out. So anyway, line up the edge of the seam for basting at the 1/2 inch mark on your machine, and then we're just going to baste the first go round. And take your time, because it is kind of weird to feed your fabric this way, and you have to kind of keep turning things to make sure everything lines up. But the good news is that doing this while you're basting, you kind of get the hang of it, and then everything's going to be lined up to just go back around with a permanent stitch line, and it'll all be flat and smooth, and you don't have to stress about it. Okay, so as you're coming around to the end, we are just going to finish it and make sure everything is still lined up. Take out that last pin. All right, so the basting stitch is done. We're going to readjust our sewing machine to whatever our normal stitch length is. I'm just going to clear mine out because that's faster. And now we're going to get everything lined up to do it all again and put in a permanent stitch line at 5/8 of an inch. So let's go in for a closer look. All right, so we've gone around with the basting stitches, and now we are going to put in the first round of permanent stitches. So let's get everything lined up, and we are going to be sewing these on 5/8 of an inch. So get everything lined up with your 5/8 mark. Make sure everything is smoothed out along that inside sleeve area. And this time we are going to be back stitching. So roll your needle down and go forward a little bit. And then I'm going to back stitch and go forward again. So I'm just keeping everything lined up. As you can see, the basting is inside of the seam line. And we're just going to go around the whole armhole with the permanent stitches. And we are just coming up on the other side. So finish that out and don't forget to back stitch. All right, so the very last part of this sleeve insertion process is the 1/4 of an inch stitch, and that is going to be when the edge is lined up with my presser foot from the needle. That distance is 1/4 of an inch. So I'm just going to get that all lined up. You can see we've got our permanent stitch line, our basting stitch line, and then we will have our inside stitch line, and then we're going to trim down that seam. So these 3 stitch lines will help keep the seam from raveling and keep it a little bit neater, but let's go in and sew that last seam line in. Last time at the ironing board, and flip your sleeves out, or no, not yet, not yet. Don't flip them out yet. We're not there yet. First we have to trim the seam of the sleeve close to that 1/4 inch line. So we're going to do that real quick. Whenever you are trimming, make sure you do not get too close to that line. I don't get super close. I usually trim whatever is left in half. That seems to be a good gauge. So you don't get too close. Don't be overly enthusiastic. The last thing you want is to snip some of your thread lines or most of them and then have a problem. So I'm just going around real quick to get this last bit snipped out. And then we are going to press open. We're not going to press it open. We're going to press the full seam allowance to the sleeve side of the garment. So right now it's just kind of hanging out in the middle, but we want it to go towards the sleeve to reduce the bulk when we wear it. Okay. Now we're going to open it up. So open up your sleeve, and we are going to be pressing the seam allowance up against the sleeve away from the body of the garment. So just get situated, lay everything out. Make sure your iron is set to whatever is appropriate for your fabric. Mine is going to be on cotton with high steam, and we are going to start pressing towards the seam. So just give it a little bit of steam. Hold your iron in one place. Let it cool. And then move down to the next area of the sleeve. Now, this is when you can go back and grab your pressing ham. It can get into those little tighter curves right under the arm to help with the pressing. So I'm going to do that. They also have sleeve hams. I don't know if they're called a ham when it's a sleeve because it doesn't look like a ham. But anyway, they have sleeve presser things that look just like this, but they're longer, that you could use for sleeves if you have one of those. So I'm just doing this bottom seam underneath the armpit area. Letting it cool a little bit, and then I'm going to go to the other side and finish pressing that towards the sleeve. And once you're done trimming and pressing this sleeve, go ahead and do the other one, and then I'll meet you back at the cutting table for the big reveal. Once we've got the seams pressed out towards the sleeves, now it's time for the big reveal. So I'm going to flip the dress to the inside. And pull out those raglan sleeves. And there you go. We've got some raglan sleeves and this cute dress, and they were pretty easy to put in, and they came out really well. No puckers, very smooth seams, which is just what we always want. If this pattern isn't to your style, go check out another pattern that has raglan sleeves because they're so much easier to put in. You won't be intimidated by sleeves for very long. If you've enjoyed this video, be sure to click like and subscribe to my channel so you never miss a stitch. And if you want more tips and tricks from So Lounge, click the link in the description below this video and get 7 insider sewing tips delivered straight to your inbox. It's everything a beginner needs to know when you're starting to sew. Until we meet again, happy sewing!